The ocean had always been his only con. Long after the uniforms were folded and the medals tucked away in drawers, the sea still spoke to him, not in words but in memories. Each wave carried echoes of commands shouted through salt and wind. Each gust smelled like duty. Sergeant Mason Hale, U.S. Marine Corps, Rutiaris, lived alone now in a weathered shack on the California coast, where the Pacific kissed the cliffs with the patience of time. He spent his mornings walking the beach with his dog, Radar, collecting driftwood and silence. His days were quiet, almost peaceful, but peace, for a man who'd spent half his life in combat zones, was never absolute. It was borrowed. The locals knew him only as the quiet old Marine who fixed boats and rarely spoke. But inside, Mason carried the hum of a different kind of noise, the echo of helicopters, the crack of gunfire, the chaos of rescue missions under enemy fire. He had learned to live with, to breathe through it. Until that, the wind was sharp, cold, and Mason noticed it before Radar did, a sound that didn't belong to the rhythm of the wave. Not the crash of surf, not the cry of gulls, something desperate. He stopped walking. Tide was low, the sun still climbing from the horizon, but there it was, a faint high carried by. He scanned the water, eyes narrowing against the glare. At first, then, in the distance, something flickered, just beyond the break, a fin thrashing weakly against the pull of the current. Mason's chest tightened. It wasn't just any sound, it was the sound of distress, a call for help. The same kind he'd spent decades answering. Radar barked once, ears perked toward the sea. Mason's instincts kicked in before thought had the chance to argue. He dropped his jacket, eyes fixed on the struggling shape. The years might have slowed his bone, dulled his reflex. He grabbed the small rescue, a habit from the days when "be ready" wasn't a motto, survival. Then, without hesitation, he ran toward the water. The cold bit into him instantly. The tide surged around his knees, then his chest. But as his boots left the sand and his muscles remembered the rhythm of swimming through rough waters, something old, the Marine, the rescuer, the man who never ignored. He didn't know what waited beyond the waves, only that it was fighting to live. And somewhere deep inside, the current pulled hard, as if the ocean itself wanted to test him one more time. Mason pushed through it, his breath steady, his strokes sharp. Years of muscle memory guided him. The same movements that had once carried brothers in arms through storms, fire, and chaos. Now they carried him toward something smaller, more fragile, yet no less sacred. The water grew darker as he swam. Foam sprayed against his face, and salt burned his eyes. But ahead, he finally saw it. A young dolphin, tangled in a mess of nylon fishing nets, the plastic cutting deep into its skin. Each movement only made the knots tighter. Its cries were sharp, trembling through the water like sonar pleas for mercy. Mason's chest ached, not from the cold, not from the effort. He had seen that same kind of panic before, in soldiers trapped under wreckage, in civilians caught in crossfire, in himself, long ago. "Easy," voice breaking the rhythm of the waves. "Easy, buddy, I've got you." The dolphin thrashed, instinctively afraid. The net pulled tight around its fin, slicing small lines of blood into the water. Mason reached for his knife, the same one he'd carried since Afghanistan, a relic of another life, and cut carefully, inch by. The rope resisted, thick and stubborn. He fought it, teeth gritted, heart hammering against his ribs. The ocean was unforgiving. A wave slammed into him, spinning him sideways. He swallowed a mouthful of salt water, coughed, then steadied himself. His old shoulder injury screamed, but he kept cutting. Every fiber of his body remembered what it meant to keep going when everything else told you to stop. Finally, one strand snapped, then another. The dolphin jerked half free. Mason kept working, his fingers raw against the rope. Another cut. Another, until the last knot gave way. For a second, nothing happened. The dolphin floated motionless, stunned. Mason held his. Then, with a sudden surge, the creature twisted free, circling him once, twice, before breaking the surface in a burst of spray that glistened under the morning sun. Mason surfaced too, gasping for air, the cold biting into his bones. He watched the dolphin glide away, slower now, but alive. The sight carved a strange warmth through his chest, deeper than pride. Radar barked wildly from the shore, pacing in the surf. Mason smiled faintly and raised a tired hand in acknowledgement. But the smile faded as quickly as it came, because as the waves calmed, the sea gave something back, a torn piece of netting drifting toward him, tangled with something else, a small metal tag, weathered by salt and time, stamped with military letters, USMC, Bravo Company. He stared at it, frozen. It wasn't just any piece of metal. It was from a training vessel that had gone down years ago, a mission that had never truly left. The ocean, it seemed, wasn't finished with Sergeant Mason Hale. Not yet. The sea was restless that afternoon, the kind of restless that made veterans glance instinctively toward the horizon, as if danger could still rise from. Mason stood by the water's edge, the damp tag turning slowly. The letters had almost faded, but he could still trace them. His thumb. USMC Bravo. The unit he had lost years ago. The men who had vanished in a training mission swallowed by this same ocean. He had told himself He had told himself the sea had already taken what it needed. But standing there, soaked to the bone, watching the waves shimmer like old ghosts, Mason knew better. The sea never gave closure. It only gave chances to make things right. He spent the next hour untangling the remnants of the net that had nearly killed the Dolphin. The rope was heavy with salt and guilt. Embedded in it were hooks, rusted metal, and pieces of debris from a sunken craft. When he saw the faint red stripe of military paint clinging to one broken fragment, his stomach dropped. It wasn't just fishing waste. It was wreckage. He loaded the net into his small rescue skiff, the same one he used to help stranded seals or remove debris from the cove. Radar whined as he climbed aboard, sensing the weight in his master's just one more mission. The words felt old, words he thought he'd never say again. The engine coughed to life, and the skiff cut through the gray water. The sky dimmed, clouds gathering like a curtain before the storm. The deeper he went, the stronger the current became. It was as if the ocean remembered him. Half a mile from shore, the water turned darker, a swirling patch of blue and shadow. Mason slowed the engine and peered down. Beneath the waves, something glinted, metal, twisted, half-buried, in sand. He dropped anchor and slipped into his wetsuit, his breath misting in the chill air. The moment his body broke the surface, the cold wrapped around him like the world above faded. Only silence remained, the deep pulsing heartbeat of the down below. The wreck was waiting. It wasn't large, the size of a patrol craft, but its hull bore the unmistakable markings of the Marine Corps. Moss and coral had claimed it, turning it into a graveyard disguised as a reef. Mason swam closer, his flashlight cutting through the murk. Inside the wreck, tangled in nets and metal, something moved, not a ghost, but life. A dolphin calf, trapped again, smaller than the first, barely breathing, its tail fin pinned under a collapsed beam, his chest. "You've got to be kidding me," through his regulator. But even underwater, he felt it. That same spark, that same fire that once drove him through war zones and disaster zones alike. He unclipped his knife and began cutting through the web of lines. The current tugged at him, spinning debris into his face. His oxygen hissed steady, but his pulse quickened. The beam wouldn't move easily. Rust had fused it in place. He braced his boots against the hull. Metal screamed. The Dolphin twitched weakly, its eye rolling toward him, terrified, fading. Not today, Mason, his muscles burning. Just again, and the beam shifted, just enough. The calf wriggled free, bolting upward toward the light, a streak of silver vanishing into blue. Mason smiled behind his mask, a weary kind of victory blooming in his chest. Then the wreck groaned. A second beam snapped loose. The world went dark. Sand and silt erupted as the structure caved in, collapsing toward him. Mason twisted, but too late. Debris slammed into his side, pinning his leg. The impact sent his flashlight spinning into the abyss. The sea swallowed the light whole. He was alone again, trapped beneath the weight of his past. Literally this time. For a moment panic clawed at him. The old nightmare replayed. The crash, the men screaming, the silence. But then a sound broke through, a faint click, a whistle. The dolphin calf, the same one he'd just saved, had returned. Circling him, its fins brushed against his arm as if calling him back to the surface, urging him to fight. Mason's breath steadied. He gripped the knife again, cutting the rope that bound his leg. Inch by inch, the weight loosened. He shoved once, Twice, and the metal shifted enough for him to pull free. He kicked upward, lungs screaming, following the faint shimmer above. The dolphin swam beside him, pushing gently, guiding him. When they broke the surface together, Mason tore off his mask and sucked in air like it was life itself. Rain had started to fall, cold, heavy, relentless, but he laughed anyway. A deep, raw laugh that the wind carried across the waves. Radar barked in the distance, his small figure waiting at the edge of the shore. Mason raised a trembling hand toward the dolphin as it circled once more, then disappeared into the gray. The Marine had answered his final call, and for the first time in years, he felt free. The rain didn't stop for hours. It fell in sheets across the bay, turning the shoreline into a gray watercolor of sky and sea. Mason sat by the fire in his shack, wrapped in an old blanket, the metal tag resting on the table beside him. The letters, USMC, Bravo Company, caught the glow of the flames, trembling like ghosts of names long gone. Radar lay curled at his feet, asleep, twitching. Outside, the waves kept their rhythm, a heartbeat that refused to fade. Mason's hands were raw from the salt and the fight. His shoulder throbbed where the beam had struck him, but it wasn't the pain, the kind that followed every mission, the kind that always came after saving or losing someone. He stared into the fire until the sound of the dolphin's cry still echoed in his mind, that sharp, pleading sound that had cut through the wind, dragging him back into the sea. He hadn't realized until now what it truly meant. It wasn't just a call for help, it was a reminder. He'd spent years trying to leave that part of himself behind, the Marine, the rescuer, the man who ran toward chaos instead of away from it. He thought by retreating to the quiet, he could silence that voice forever. But the truth was cruel. Duty doesn't die. It only sleeps, waiting for the next cry. He leaned forward, running his thumb along the metal tag again. Memories flickered. The crash, the storm, the men shouting over the radio, the water swallowing everything. He had survived. Survival wasn't the same as living. He had carried that guilt like an anchor for years, believing the sea had taken his purpose along with his brothers. But now the same sea had given him a second chance, not to prove himself, but to heal. A sudden splash outside pulled him from his thought. He stepped out onto the porch. The storm had softened into a drizzle, the sky bruised with the first light of dawn. And there, in the shallow surf, the dolphin was waiting, the same one he had freed. Its dorsal fin cut through the water, slow and graceful, as if it had come back to say what words never could. Mason stepped closer, the cold biting his bare feet. The dolphin stayed near, watching him with eyes that seemed far too knowing. Then, slowly, it dipped beneath the surface and rose again, pushing something toward him. It was the same tattered net, torn apart, tangled now with some driftwood, shaped like... Mason knelt, letting the water wash over his hands. He felt something break in, not in pain but in release. All the years of guilt, of running from... They finally loosened. Thank you. He didn't know if he was speaking to the dolphin, his fallen brothers, or to the sea itself. The dolphin clicked softly, a sound almost like acknowledgement, and turned back toward the open water. Mason watched as it swam farther, its silhouette fading into the morning light. He stood there for a long time, the surf brushing against his boots, the tag warm in his hand despite the cold. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, he smiled, a quiet, tired smile, because he understood now. The ocean doesn't call for everyone, but when it calls you, you answer. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but earned. The storm had passed, leaving the coastline washed clean, and the sea stretched endlessly, calm and silver, under the morning light. Mason walked the shore again, slower this time, radar trotting at his side. The air carried the soft hum of gulls and the low pulse of the tide, sounds that no longer stirred the ghosts inside him. He had learned to listen differently. Every ripple, every whisper of the waves felt like a language he finally understood. It was rhythm. It was... In the village, people began to notice small things. The old Marine who once kept to himself now spent his afternoons helping local fishermen cut their nets free of debris. He built wooden buoys marked with red flags, warnings for where dolphins played. And at dawn, he could sometimes be seen waist-deep in the water, waiting, watching, as if expecting a friend to surface. He never spoke about the wreck or the rescue. He didn't need to. The story traveled on its own, carried by the wind, retold by fishermen, whispered by children who claimed to have seen the Marine and the Dolphin swimming together at sunset. One evening, a small boy approached him on the pier. "Mister, is it true you saved a dolphin?" Mason smiled faintly. "No, he saved me." The boy looked confused. Mason didn't explain. Some truths weren't meant to be, they had to be felt. As the sun began to sink, Mason stood at the edge of the pier, the sea glowing like molten glass. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the weathered USMC Bravo. For a long moment he turned it in his hand, then let it fall. The tag sank slowly, spinning, until the light swallowed it whole. He watched until it disappeared. Then he whispered, "Rest easy, boys. We're home now." Radar barked softly, tail wagging against the boards. The Marine smiled, the lines of his face softened by the gold of dusk. Out beyond the waves, something broke the surface, a sleek dorsal fin, cutting the water in a gold arc. Mason didn't move. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging an old comrade. The Dolphin lingered for a moment, then dove again, leaving only ripples that shimmered in the fading light. For Mason Hale, that was enough. The mission was over. The silence no longer haunted him. It healed him, and the ocean, once his battlefield, had finally become his home. Years passed, but the ocean never forgot. It carried the memory of that day the way it carries light, bending it, softening it, keeping it alive beneath every rip. Mason Hale's shack by the coast slowly became part of local folklore. Fishermen spoke of him in the same breath they used for storms and miracles. Children pointed to the waves and whispered about the old Marine who spoke to dolphins. Some swore they saw a silver fin trailing his boat at dusk, following him like a shadow of gratitude. He never confirmed the stories. He just smiled when people asked, a knowing smile that said some truths were too sacred to explain. As the years settled over him like fine sand, Mason's steps grew slower, his voice quieter, but his eyes, those steady blue eyes, always turned toward the horizon. The ocean remained his compass, his chapel, his unfinished conversation with the world. One winter morning, the villagers found his skiff drifting just offshore, empty, its oars neatly tied, the engine still. Inside lay only two things, his worn marine jacket and a piece of driftwood carved into the shape of a dolphin. They searched for days, but the sea gave no answer. It never does. Only whispers carried on the wind and the faint echo of waves against the hull, like a heartbeat fading into eternity. Some said he had gone diving one last time. Others said the ocean had come to claim what was always hers. But those who truly knew Mason Hale didn't speak of loss. They spoke of return. Because sometimes when the tide was high and the sky burned gold, a dolphin could still be seen circling the bay, surfacing near the old pier, as if waiting for someone. And those who stood quietly enough swore they could hear a voice carried through the wind, calm, steady, familiar. The sea doesn't take, it remembers. Time moved differently. Seasons blurred together, storms and sunsets, tides and winds, all folding into one eternal rhythm. Yet for those who lived near the coast, Mason Hale was never gone. Years after his skiff was found adrift, the Marine Corps sent a small delegation to the village. They came not with fanfare, with reverence. A young lieutenant placed a folded flag on the weathered dock where Mason had once stood watching the horizon. Beside it they set a plaque carved in bronze, Sergeant Mason Hale, United States Marine Corps. He answered every call, even the ocean. The villagers gathered. Old fishermen removed their caps. Children who'd grown up hearing stories of the Marine and the Dolphin watched with wide eyes as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the water in gold. Among the crowd stood a woman, Dr. Elena Cruz, a marine biologist from San Diego. She had studied dolphin behavior for years, and yet what she witnessed in that bay defied her science. Every year, around the same day Mason had vanished, a pod of dolphins appeared in that same cove, not just swimming, waiting, circling. And each time one dolphin, larger, older, its fin marked by a faint scar, would rise near the pier and remain there for hours, its gaze fixed on the shore. Elena had tried recording it, tagging it, understanding it, but after a while she stopped trying to explain. She just watched, because deep down she knew some bonds don't end where the water begins. That year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, the Marines held a small service by the water. The color guard stood at attention, the sound of taps echoing across. As the final note faded, something extraordinary happened. The sea from the horizon, a group of dolphins breached the surface, gliding toward the pier in perfect formation. 6 of them, just like the crowd gasped. The youngest Marine among them whispered, "They're saluting him." The dolphins circled once, twice, then dove as one, disappearing beneath the water's surface, leaving behind only ripples that shimmered like tears in the sun. Helena wiped her eyes. Somewhere in her chest she felt the same quiet peace Mason, the kind that doesn't need words, only the steady heart. She turned to the young lieutenant. "Do you think he really saved them that day?" she asked. The Marine looked out toward the waves, his voice low but certain. "No, I think they saved each other." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and memory. And in that moment, as the tide rolled in, it almost sounded like laughter. Deep, quiet, familiar. Mason Hale was gone, yes, but his story moved with the water now. In every rescue, every act of courage, every Marine who looked at the ocean and felt something awaken inside. Because heroes don't always rest in silence. Sometimes they live on, in the rhythm of the waves, and in the call that never fades. The ocean's calm, that unnaturally calm, like the sea itself was holding its breath. The sun melted into the horizon, staining the waves in gold and blood-orange hues, and a single Marine stood alone at the edge of the pier. His name was Lieutenant Aiden. He'd grown up hearing the story. The Marine who saved the Dolphin, the man the sea never returned. To most, it was a legend. But for Aiden, it was a calling. He had read Mason Hale's file, the official reports, the missing person record closed without closure. But none of that told him who Mason really was. It was the locals who did, the old fisherman who spoke of a man who listened to the tide like it was speaking directly to him. A man who didn't fear the sea because he understood it. Aiden had joined the Corps to be like him. Not the hero in the headlines, but the kind who served quietly, the kind who answered without being asked. Now, years later, standing where Mason once stood, Aiden felt the same wind brush against his face, the same salt his skin. He thought of all the men and women who had come before him, who had fought, fallen, and faded into the blue. He saluted the horizon. For a moment, nothing happened, only the steady sound of the waves. Then, a ripple, far out at sea, a flash of silver. Aiden squinted. The shape drew closer, smooth, fluid, unmistakable. A dolphin breached the surface, arcing through the air like a streak of light. Then another, and another, a small pod moving in perfect rhythm, heading straight for the pier. Aiden stepped forward. His heart pounded. He could hear them now, the sharp clicks, the whistles carried through the wind. They stopped near the pier, circling in the shallow water, as if searching for something or someone. He dropped to one knee, leaning closer. One dolphin rose higher than the rest, its fin marked by an old faded scar, the same one from the stories, the same one from that long-ago rescue. Aiden's throat tightened. "You remember." The dolphin lingered for a long moment, then nudged something towards the wooden beam below him, a small, corroded piece of metal caught in a strand of seaweed. Aiden reached down and picked. It was Mason's tag, USMC, Bravo Company. He stared at it, stunned, the weight of it sinking into his chest like a heartbeat reborn. The dolphins began to move again, forming a slow circle in the water, their movements deliberate, graceful, almost ritualistic. Aiden stood tall, the tag clutched in his palm. He raised his hand to his brow in salute, the evening light casting his silhouette against the sea. For a brief moment he swore he saw a figure standing beside him, an older man, broad-shouldered, weathered by salt and time, smiling faintly at the horizon. Then the wind shifted. The dolphins dove as one, disappearing beneath the glow of the... Aiden stood there long after they were gone, the tag warm in his hand. He didn't need to. The silence said. When he finally turned to leave, the tide washed gently over the pier, whispering against the wood. The same sound Mason once called the ocean's heartbeat. The sea had called once more, and another Marine had answered.